The gravel crunched beneath Mark Holloway's tires as he drove past the weathered sign welcoming visitors to Ashvale. Population 832, though he suspected that number hadn't been updated in decades. The New England autumn painted the surrounding mountains in brilliant reds and golds, a stark contrast to the gray, overcast sky threatening rain. 25 years had passed since he'd fled this place, and nothing about his return felt like a homecoming. Recording day 1, Mark spoke into his handheld recorder. October 17th. Entering Ashvale for the first time since 1998, he paused the device as Main Street came into view. The town looked smaller than he remembered, the general store, post office, and diner all showing signs of decay. Only the white steeple of Ashvale Chapel, rising above the tree line on the eastern hill, remained unchanged. Mark parked outside Meredith's diner, where a bell chimed as he entered. The handful of patrons turned to stare, conversations halting mid-sentence. An older woman approached, her namatag reading Carol. Her eyes widened with recognition. Mark Holloway? My goodness, I never thought I'd see you back here. Hello, Carol. Been a long time. 25 years, she said, pouring coffee without asking. Since Tommy. Mark nodded, his throat tightening. That's why I'm back. I'm making a documentary about what happened. The clatter of silverware fell silent around them. You always were stubborn, Carol said, her voice dropping. Some things are better left alone, Mark. My brother disappeared. Without a trace. Nobody ever found out what happened. We all mourned Tommy, the whole town did. But digging into old wounds won't bring him back. Mark took out his recorder. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Carol glanced nervously at the other patrons. This isn't a good idea. I'm staying at my parents' old house. It's been empty since my mom moved to Florida. If you change your mind about talking, you know where to find me. As Mark left, he heard whispers resume behind him. Walking to his car, he noticed an elderly man watching from across the street. The man approached with a halting gait, looking over his shoulder before speaking. You're the Holloway boy, aren't you? Tommy's brother? Yes, sir, Mark Holloway, Vernon Phelps. I taught history at the high school when you were there. His roomie. Eyes darted around nervously. I heard you talking in there. About your brother, Mark nodded. I'm trying to find out what happened to him. Meet me tomorrow. Not here in town. The old covered bridge, noon. Vernon leaned closer. And Mark? Watch the chapel. Count the bells. Never be outside after the 3rd. What do you mean? They'll say I'm just a senile old man. Maybe I am. But your brother knew something about that chapel, about what happens after the 3rd bell. Vernon backed away. Tomorrow noon. Come alone. Before Mark could respond, Vernon hurried away, leaving him standing in the empty street as the first raindrops began to fall. Driving to his childhood home, Mark passed the chapel on the hill. The structure seemed to watch him, its stained glass windows dark against the white clapboard. As if on cue, a bell tolled once, its somber note echoing across the valley. 1, Mark counted under his breath, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He turned onto Willow Lane, where his parents' Victorian house stood abandoned, paint peeling and shutters hanging askew. Inside, sheet-covered furniture loomed like ghosts in the dim light in what was once Tommy's room. Mark set up his equipment. His brother had been 10 when he vanished. Mark, 16 then, had found the empty bed. The window open despite the October chill. The search parties found nothing. No body, no evidence. Just Tommy's red sneaker at the edge of the woods near Ashvale Chapel. Mark pinned a map to the wall, marking the locations of interest. The chapel, his house, the woods where the shoe was found. Outside, the bell tolled a second time. 2, he whispered, an old childhood habit he couldn't explain. His phone rang, startling him. Mr. Holloway? This is Sheriff Garner. I understand you're back in town asking questions about your brother. News travels fast. It's a small town. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow. I have plans at noon, but 10 a.m. at my office. This isn't a request." The line went dead as darkness fell. Mark stood at the window, staring toward the distant chapel. The third bell would toll at 9 p.m., always had. An old warning echoed in his memory, repeated by parents throughout Ashvale. Be home before the third bell. But why? What happened after the third bell? The distant toll began, and Mark felt his heart quicken. 3, he whispered, as the sound faded into the night, and in the darkness outside his window, something moved. Mark jolted awake to sunlight streaming through dusty curtains. His recorder lay beside him, still running from the night before. He hadn't meant to fall asleep at his makeshift research desk, but exhaustion had claimed him sometime after midnight. He stretched, wincing at the stiffness in his neck, then clicked off the recorder. Something on the playback caught his attention, a sound he hadn't made. Rewinding, he listened carefully. There it was. At 3:17 a.m., barely audible, scratching at the window, followed by what sounded like a child's whisper. "Tommy?" The voice was so faint he couldn't be sure. Mark rushed to the window, examining the peeling paint of the sill. 3 fresh scratch marks marred the wood. After a quick shower, Mark headed to his meeting with Sheriff Garner, driving through town as residents. Went about their morning routines. They watched him pass, their gazes following his car with undisguised suspicion. The sheriff's office occupied the west wing of Ashvale's municipal building, a brick structure dating back to the 1920s. Inside, a young deputy directed Mark to Garner's office without looking up from her computer. Sheriff Lucas Garner was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and deep creases around his eyes. He didn't stand when Mark entered, merely gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Mr. Holloway, welcome back to Ashvale, Sheriff. I don't believe we've met. I came on 10 years ago, after Sheriff Braddock retired. I've read all the files on your brother's case." Mark set his recorder on the desk. "Mind if I record this?" Garner's jaw tightened. "I'd prefer you didn't. It's for my documentary. Full transparency." "There won't be a documentary, Mr. Holloway. Not about Tommy." Mark leaned forward. "Excuse me? I'm telling you this as a courtesy. You're stirring up painful memories for folks who've spent decades trying to heal. The town council has unanimously voted to deny any filming permits. I don't need permits to interview willing participants. You'll find people here aren't willing." Garner's tone was flat. "Tommy's disappearance was investigated thoroughly. Sometimes children go missing. Sometimes there are no answers. My brother said something was happening at the chapel the night before he disappeared." Garner's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his pen tighter. Children have vivid imaginations. He was scared. "He told me. People went into the chapel after the third bell and didn't come out the same. Mr. Holloway, I'm going to give you some advice. Grieve your brother. Make peace with the past. But drop this investigation. Or what? Or you'll find Ashvale isn't as welcoming as it once was." Garner stood. "We're done here." Outside, Mark checked his watch. Still 2 hours before meeting Vernon Phelps. He decided to visit the public library, hoping to research Ashvale's history and the chapel. The librarian, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Wells, recognized him immediately. "Mark Holloway, my goodness." Her smile seemed genuine, unlike the others he'd encountered. "I remember you always hiding in the fantasy section when you were supposed to be in school." Mark laughed. "You never reported me. Some kids need books more than lectures." Her expression softened. "I was so sorry about Tommy. We all were. That's actually why I'm here. I'm researching Ashvale's history, especially the chapel." Patricia's smile faded. "Local history is in the East Wing. Town records go back to the founding in 1794. She hesitated. The chapel records are incomplete. There was a fire in 73 that destroyed many church documents. As Mark browsed the shelves, he found a leather-bound volume titled Ashvale, A History. Flipping through, he discovered a chapter on the chapel's construction in 1823. One passage caught his eye. Following the Winter of Sorrow 18223, wherein 17 children perished of unknown causes, Reverend Isaiah Blackwood commissioned the chapel's construction, declaring it would stand as sentinel against the darkness that claimed our innocent. The 3 bells were cast from silver donated by each founding family, and the ritual of the 3 tolls commenced on All Hallows Eve, 1823. Mark photographed the page, then searched for more information on this Winter of Sorrow, but found nothing specific. As he was about to leave, Patricia approached with a folded piece of paper. "I found something you might want to see," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "A journal entry from Reverend Blackwood's personal papers. It's not in the official archives." Mark unfolded the paper. The photocopied text was faded but legible. "May God forgive what we have done. The pact is sealed with innocent blood. The entity demands its tribute when the 3rd bell calls. 1 child each year, that others might be spared. We bear this terrible burden for generations to come." When Mark looked up, Patricia's face was pale. "Where did you find this?" "In my grandmother's attic after she died. She was a Blackwood." Patricia's voice trembled. "Mark, be careful. Some in town still believe in the pact." The chapel bell tolled once in the distance. "I should go," Mark said. Patricia gripped his arm. "Don't trust anyone who defends the chapel. And whatever you do, don't be near it after the 3rd bell." Mark nodded, tucking the paper into his pocket as he headed for his meeting with Vernon Phelps, the bell's echo still hanging in the crisp autumn air. The old covered bridge spanned a narrow section of the Ashvale River, its weathered red boards contrasting with the vibrant autumn foliage. Mark arrived 15 minutes early, parking his car at the southern approach and walking inside the structure. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, casting strips of light across the worn planks. Inside, the bridge smelled of damp wood and river water. Graffiti marked the wall's initials, dates, crude drawings. Mark ran his fingers over. One carving, TH plus S. Tommy and his childhood crush, Abigail Stevens. The sight made his chest tighten. Footsteps approached from the north entrance. Vernon Phelps appeared, looking even older in daylight, carrying a canvas satchel. "You came alone?" Vernon asked, voice echoing in the enclosed space. "Yes, just like you asked." Vernon nodded, then pulled something from his satchel, a handheld AM/FM radio. He turned it on, tuning to static, and raised the volume. "So they can't hear us," he explained, noting Mark's confused expression. "Sound masking, an old intelligence trick." "Who would be listening?" "The council. They have ears everywhere." Vernon set the radio down between them. "Did you count the bells last night?" "Yes, 3, just like always." "And did anything happen after, at your house?" Mark hesitated. "I heard scratching at my window." A voice that sounded like ... Lock Tommy. Vernon nodded grimly. "It's starting again. It knows you're here." "What knows I'm here?" "We called it the Congregant. That's what the founders named it." Vernon removed a leather-bound journal from his satchel. "I was the town historian before I taught school. I found this hidden in the library basement, walled up behind the furnace." He handed Mark the journal. The cover was unmarked, the pages yellowed with age. "This is the true account of Ashvale's founding. Not the sanitized version they keep in the records." Vernon glanced nervously toward the bridge entrance. "The chapel wasn't built to worship God, Mark. It was built to contain something else. Something the settlers encountered in these woods in 1794. Mark opened the journal. Finding an entry dated December 18, 1794, the entity has agreed to our terms. It will spare the village from sickness and famine, protect us from the savage wilderness, in exchange for its tithe. 1 child each year, to be delivered after the 3rd bell on the eve of winter's arrival. God help us, we have made a pact with darkness itself. This can't be real, Mark whispered. Your brother found this journal the week before he disappeared. He stole it from my office when I stepped out. I didn't know until afterward. Vernon's voice cracked. I should have warned him. I thought the old stories were just superstitions. You're saying Tommy was taken as some kind of vice. The congregant takes a child every year, but they have to enter the chapel willingly after the 3rd bell. That's why the warning was passed down to protect the children while preserving the pact. Who decides which child? Mark asked, his voice hard. The Council of Families descendants of the original settlers. They choose based on signs they believe the congregant sends. Vernon looked away. Usually orphans or children from broken homes, those who won't be missed much outside Ashvale. Like Tommy, after our father left, Vernon nodded. I believe your brother was chosen that year, but something went wrong. He wasn't supposed to know about the journal. The radio's static crackled, then briefly cleared, voices coming through before returning to white noise. Vernon tensed. We need to move. We've been here too long. As they stepped outside the bridge, a police cruiser pulled up, blocking the southern exit. Sheriff Garner stepped out, hand resting on his holstered weapon. Mr. Phelps, Mr. Holloway, quite a coincidence finding you both here. Just catching up, Sheriff, Mark said casually, sliding the journal into his jacket. That so? Garner's eyes narrowed. Mr. Phelps, your niece has been looking for you. Says you missed your medication this morning. Vernon stiffened. I'm fine, Sheriff. I'll drive you home anyway. Garner's tone left no room for argument. Mr. Holloway can continue his sightseeing alone. Vernon turned to Mark. Remember what I said. Count the bells. And find Abigail Stevens. She was with Tommy that night. She knows. As Garner led Vernon to the cruiser, the old man called back. Check the baptismal font in the chapel. The names are carved underneath. Mark watched them drive away, then opened the journal again, flipping through pages describing rituals and observations of the congregant. One passage chilled him. It wears the faces of those it has taken, appearing as children to lure the next offering. Many report hearing their lost loved ones calling from the chapel after the 3rd bell. We know better than to answer those calls. The 2nd bell of the day tolled in the distance. Mark looked toward the chapel on the hill, its white steeple stark against the blue October sky. If Vernon was right, the answer to Tommy's disappearance lay inside those walls, and so did the horror that had haunted Ashvale for over 2 centuries. Finding Abigail Stevens proved more difficult than Mark anticipated. She wasn't listed in the local directory, and when he asked at the diner, conversation stopped abruptly. Abby left town years ago, Carol finally offered, refilling his coffee. After what happened with your brother. Do you know where she went? Some folks say Boston. Others heard she went west. Carol's eyes darted to the other patrons. People don't really keep in touch with those who leave Ashvale. A young waitress, clearing nearby tables, caught Mark's attention. She slipped him a napkin as she passed, then hurried to the kitchen. Written in blue pen was an address, 117 Briarwood Lane, Pine Cottage. The address led Mark to the outskirts of town, where a narrow dirt road wound through dense forest. Pine Cottage was barely visible from the road, a small, cedar-shingled structure nearly swallowed by surrounding vegetation. Mark parked and approached cautiously. Wind chimes hung from the porch, tinkling discordantly. Before he could knock, the door opened. Abigail Stevens had grown from the pigtailed girl in Quoveland Tommy's class photo into a woman with weary eyes and premature silver streaking her dark hair. She wore a flannel shirt and jeans, arms crossed defensively. "I've been expecting you," she said. "Figured you'd show up once word got around town. You've been here all along? Everyone said you left." "That's what they were told to say." She stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The cottage interior was sparsely furnished but clean. Books filled most surfaces, and an easel stood by the window, a half-finished landscape on its canvas. "I keep to myself," Abigail explained, putting a kettle on the stove. "People leave me alone, and I leave them alone. It works, until I showed up asking questions. Until that, yes." She prepared 2 mugs of tea. "You want to know about Tommy?" It wasn't a question. Mark nodded anyway. "I was there that night," she said, sitting across from him. "October 21st, 1998. We were both 10. Tommy had found some old book that scared him. He said we had to see what happened in the chapel after the 3rd bell. Vernon Phelps's journal." Abigail's hands trembled slightly. "Tommy said it was about a monster that ate children. I thought he was making it up." "But you went with him?" "We made a pact. Best friends forever." Her voice cracked. "We hid in the woods near the chapel. When the 3rd bell rang, we saw them, the council members, wearing robes with hoods. They went inside carrying candles. And then Tommy wanted to look through the windows. I was too scared. He said he'd go alone and come right back." Abigail's eyes grew distant. I waited and waited. Then I heard Tommy screaming from inside. Mark felt his heart pounding. "What did you do?" "I ran to the door, but someone grabbed me from behind. It was Reverend Caldwell. He covered my mouth and dragged me away." Tears welled in her eyes. "He said if I ever told anyone what I saw, the same thing would happen to me." "What did you see, Abigail?" She stared into her tea. "Before the Reverend grabbed me, I looked through the door. They had Tommy surrounded at the altar, and behind him was something. It looked like a person, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. Its face kept changing, shifting between different children's faces." Mark thought of the journal description. "It wears the faces of those it has taken." "I saw Tommy's face appear on it for just a second," Abigail whispered. "Then the Reverend pulled me away." "Did you tell the police?" "Sheriff Braddock was part of the council. They made me say Tommy and I got separated in the woods. That I never saw him after dark." She looked up, eyes haunted. "They watched me for years, made it clear what would happen if I spoke out." "Why are you telling me now?" "Because it's happening again. Last month, at the Harvest Festival, I overheard council members talking. The congregant is hungry. The last offering didn't satisfy." Last offering? They're still doing this?" Abigail nodded grimly. "Every year, Mark, one child disappears from Ashvale or nearby towns, always ruled as runaways or accidents. Always around October 21st. Mark's blood ran cold. That's tomorrow." "Yes, and they've chosen their next offering." Abigail reached for a newspaper clipping. Lily Pearson, age 9. Foster child, recently placed with the Caldwell family. The photo showed a small girl with blonde pigtails and a tentative smile. "We have to stop them," Mark said. "How?" "The council includes the sheriff, the mayor, the school principal, all descendants of founding families. They own this town. We need evidence, hard proof we can take to state authorities." Mark stood. "I'm going into that chapel tonight." "After the 3rd bell? That's suicide. Before." "I need to see the baptismal font Vernon mentioned. Find the names." Abigail shook her head. "They'll catch you. The chapel is always watched." "Not if they're distracted." Mark formulated a plan. "Can you create a diversion? Something to draw attention away from the chapel around dusk? I could start a small fire at the old mill. It's abandoned, but they'd respond immediately. She hesitated. What if you find this congregant thing? I don't believe in monsters, Mark said firmly. I believe in people doing terrible things and blaming superstition. Tommy was killed by people, not some entity. As Mark prepared to leave, Abigail caught his arm. Be careful. Whether you believe or not, something unnatural lives in that chapel. Her eyes held his. And Mark, if you hear Tommy's voice calling you, ... don't answer. The second bell tolled as Mark drove back toward town, the sun already dipping toward the western mountains. He had just hours before darkness fell over Ashvale, and with it, the third bell that had haunted the town for generations. Mark waited in his car near the abandoned mill as dusk settled over Ashvale. Abigail's plan was simple but effective. A controlled fire in the old wooden structure would draw emergency services away from the town center, giving Mark time to investigate the chapel. At 6:30 p.m., smoke began rising from the mill's eastern wing. Within minutes, sirens wailed as fire trucks and police cruisers raced toward the blaze. Mark counted 3 police vehicles heading to the scene, including Sheriff Garner's SUV. Now or never, he muttered, starting his engine. The chapel parking lot was empty when he arrived. The white clapboard building loomed against the darkening sky, its stained glass windows unlit. Mark approached cautiously, testing the main door. Locked. Moving to the side of the building, he found a small window, slightly ajar. With some effort, he pried it open and hoisted himself through, landing awkwardly in what appeared to be a storage room. The chapel's interior was hushed and dim, illuminated only by the fading daylight through the stained glass. The air smelled of old wood, candle wax, and something else, a faint coppery scent that reminded Mark of blood. He made his way to the main sanctuary, where wooden pews faced an altar of polished oak. Behind it hung a simple wooden cross. Nothing seemed unusual about the space until Mark noticed the floor. The chapel's wooden floorboards were arranged in a circular pattern around the altar, spiraling outward like a vortex. In the center, where one would expect to find a raised platform, was instead a slight depression. Mark checked his watch. 6:45 p.m. The third bell would toll at 9 o'clock. He had just over 2 hours. The baptismal font stood near the front of the sanctuary, a large stone basin on a pedestal. Vernon had said to check underneath for names. Mark knelt and ran his hands along the underside of the basin, feeling nothing but smooth stone. Frustrated, he examined the pedestal itself. There was a seam in the stone, pushing against one side. The pedestal rotated slightly, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small leather-bound book. The ledger contained names and dates spanning back to 1823, each entry marking October 21st of its respective year. The final entry read, Thomas Holloway, 1998. Below Tommy's name was a blank line dated October 21st, 2023 tomorrow. The name Lily Pearson was penciled in, not yet inked. Jesus, Mark whispered, photographing each page with his phone. A sound from the chapel entrance made him freeze. Keys jingled in the lock. Mark quickly replaced the ledger and slid behind the pulpit just as the door opened. The fire's contained, a man's voice said. Suspicious timing. Check the chapel, came Sheriff Garner's reply. Make sure everything's ready for tomorrow. Footsteps approached as Mark pressed himself against the wall behind the pulpit. A flashlight beam swept across the sanctuary. All clear, Sheriff, the deputy called. No sign of disturbance. Check the reliquary. Make sure the vessel is prepared. More footsteps, then the sound of wood sliding against wood. Mark peered around the edge of the pulpit to see the deputy opening a panel in the wall behind the altar. He removed what looked like an ancient clay jar sealed with wax. Seal's intact, the deputy reported. Good. Reverend Caldwell will bring the girl at 8:30. We'll begin preparations then. The men left, locking the door behind them. Mark waited several minutes before emerging from his hiding place. He approached the wall panel, finding it unlocked. Inside the small compartment sat several ritual items: candles, a silver chalice, a curved knife with strange symbols etched into its blade, and a space where the jar had been. Behind these objects, Mark noticed a seam in the wall. Pushing against it revealed another hidden space, a narrow passage leading downward. With his phone's flashlight illuminating the way, Mark descended a spiral staircase into darkness. The air grew colder with each step, the coppery smell stronger. Stairs ended in a circular chamber beneath the chapel. Stone walls were carved with symbols similar to those on the knife. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark. Mark approached slowly, shining his light on the stains. They were indeed blood-old, and new layers visible in the harsh light. Around the altar, the floor was inscribed with a large, circular pattern. Names were carved along its circumference, the founding families of Ashvale. At equal intervals around the circle stood 7 stone pillars, each topped with a hollow basin. "A containment circle," Mark whispered, recognizing the design from Vernon's journal. His light caught something in the corner, a pile of children's shoes. Moving closer, his breath caught. On top was a faded red sneaker Tommy's. Mark picked it up with trembling hands. After 25 years, here was proof his brother had been brought to this chamber. A sudden chill swept through the room. Mark's phone flickered, then died, plunging him into complete darkness. From somewhere in the darkness came a soft voice, achingly familiar. "Mark, is that you?" Tommy's voice, exactly as it had been 25 years ago. "I've been waiting for you, Mark, for so long." Mark backed toward where he thought the stairs were, heart hammering. "You're not Tommy," a giggle echoed in the darkness. "Don't you want to see me, big brother? I'm right here." "I've always been right here." Mark fumbled in his pocket for his lighter. The flame cast a weak glow that barely penetrated the darkness. Something moved at the edge of the light, a small figure with a child's silhouette. "They're coming back soon," Tommy's voice said. "You should hide, like we used to play hide and seek." The figure stepped closer. In the flickering light, Mark saw his brother's face exactly as it had been at 10 years old. But the eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty. "You're not my brother," Mark said firmly. Though his voice shook, the thing wearing Tommy's face smiled, its mouth stretching too wide. Part of me is all of them." The face rippled, briefly showing other children's features before settling back to Tommy's. "And soon, little Lily will join us too." Mark backed up the stairs, keeping the lighter extended. "What are you?" "I am the congregant. I am hunger. I am the pact." The thing remained at the bottom of the stairs. "They feed me so I spare the rest. 1 child each year, that's our deal." "And if they don't?" The thing's smile widened impossibly. "Then I take them all." In the distance, Mark heard the chapel bell toll once, the first bell of evening. He turned and ran up the stairs, the sound of childish laughter echoing behind him. Mark burst from the hidden passage into the chapel sanctuary, gasping for breath. The setting sun cast long shadows through the stained glass, painting the wooden floor in muted colors. His mind raced to process what he'd seen in the chamber. Below, the entity was real. Not a legend or superstition, but something tangible, something that had consumed his brother and countless others. The chapel bell tolled again. The second bell. Mark had less than 3 hours before they would bring Lily Pearson. He needed to get out, to find help, to stop this from happening again. As he moved toward the exit, the main doors swung open. Mark ducked behind a pew as several figures entered. Through the gaps between seats, he counted 7 people in dark clothing, led by Reverend William Caldwell, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and cold eyes. "The preparations are complete," the Reverend announced. "The vessel is ready for tonight's offering." Mayor Helen Blackwood, a descendant of The original Reverend Blackwood stepped forward. "And the child? My wife is preparing her." The foster placement was providential. The congregant chose well this year. A woman Mark recognized as the school principal spoke next. "There's still the matter of Mark Holloway. Sheriff Garner believes he knows too much." "The Holloway boy has always been a problem," said an elderly man Mark didn't recognize. "Just like his brother." "He was seen with Vernon Phelps," Sheriff Garner added, joining the group. "And I have reason to believe he entered the chapel earlier. We found footprints by the side window." Mark's heart pounded as the council members looked around the sanctuary. "Search the chapel," Reverend Caldwell ordered. "If he's here, we'll add a second offering tonight. The congregant would be pleased." As the council members spread out, Mark crawled quietly toward the storage room where he'd entered. He reached the door just as footsteps approached from the other side. Trapped, he looked for another exit and spotted a door marked Choir Loft. He slipped through it and up a narrow staircase, finding himself in a small balcony overlooking the sanctuary dock below. The council regrouped. "No sign of him," Sheriff Garner reported. "He'll be found," Reverend Caldwell said confidently. "Now, let us prepare for the ceremony." The 7 council members formed a circle around the altar. Each produced a small silver key from around their neck. "The 7 keys of the founding families," Reverend Caldwell intoned, "passed down through generations to maintain the pact." They approached the floor near the altar, where Mark now noticed a large circular metal plate. Each member inserted their key into slots around the circumference and turned simultaneously. The metal plate slid aside, revealing the chamber below, a direct opening to the ritual space Mark had just fled. From his hiding place, Mark recorded the scene with his phone, capturing each council member's face as they prepared for the ritual. "Since 1823, we have honored the pact," Reverend Caldwell announced. "One child each year to feed the congregant, that it may spare our town from its hunger. One child that hundreds may live," the others responded in unison. "Tonight we continue our sacred duty. The child Lily Pearson will be delivered after the 3rd bell." Mark had seen enough. He needed to get to the Caldwell house and save Lily. Carefully, he descended the choir loft stairs, finding a side door that led outside. The evening air felt shockingly cold after the stuffiness of the chapel. Mark circled around to the parking lot, staying in the shadows. His car was where he'd left it, but now Sheriff Garner's deputy stood beside it, clearly waiting for him. Mark retreated into the woods surrounding the chapel grounds. He would have to go on foot. The Caldwell residence stood on Maple Street, about a mile from the chapel. Mark cut through backyards and wooded lots, avoiding the main roads where council members might be searching for him. When he reached the Victorian house with its wraparound porch, lights glowed warmly in the windows. It looked like any normal family home, not the residence of people planning to sacrifice a child. Mark circled to the back, where a kitchen window revealed Mrs. Caldwell preparing dinner. There was no sign of a young girl. A small detached garage stood behind the house. As Mark approached, he heard a muffled sobbing from inside. The side door was locked, but a window was unlatched. Mark eased it open and climbed through, finding himself in a cluttered space filled with gardening tools and old furniture. The crying came from behind a stack of boxes. Mark moved them aside to reveal a small girl with blonde pigtails, dressed in what looked like a white nightgown. Her hands were bound in front of her with silk ribbons, ceremonial rather than functional, as she looked up at Mark with terror in her eyes. "It's okay," Mark whispered, kneeling beside her. "I'm here to help you. My name is Mark. Are you with them?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "No, I'm going to get you out of here." He carefully untied the ribbons. "Did they hurt you?" She shook her head. "Mrs. Caldwell said I was chosen for something special, that I would help save the town." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but I heard them talking about the chapel. About the hungry thing that lives there. You're not going to the chapel, Mark promised. We're leaving Ashvale right now. As he helped Lily to her feet, a vehicle pulled into the driveway. Through the dusty window, Mark saw Reverend Caldwell exit his car and enter the house. "We have to hurry," Mark whispered. "Can you run?" Lily nodded bravely. They slipped out the garage door into the gathering darkness. In the distance, the chapel bell began to toll, the third bell. Mark grabbed Lily's hand. "Run!" They sprinted across the backyard toward the woods, the sound of the bell echoing behind them. They had just reached the tree line when shouts erupted from the Caldwell house. "The offering is gone!" Reverend Caldwell's voice carried in the night air. "Find her!" Car doors slammed. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "This way," Mark urged, leading Lily deeper into the forest. "My friend Abigail has a cottage on the other side of these woods. We'll be safe there." As they ran, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Behind them, an unnatural wail rose from the direction of the chapel, a sound of rage and hunger that made the trees around them shudder. "What's happening?" Lily gasped as they stumbled through the underbrush. "The congregant," Mark said grimly. "It's not getting its offering tonight." The forest darkened around them as clouds obscured the moon. In the distance, flashlights bobbed as search parties spread through the woods. Mark's phone buzzed with a text from Abigail. "They're searching everywhere. Can't reach my place. Meet at covered bridge." "Change of plan," Mark told Lily. "We're heading for the bridge." They altered course, moving parallel to the main road but staying hidden in the trees. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the Caldwell property. The covered bridge appeared ahead, its dark outline barely visible in the night. As they approached, Mark saw Abigail's car parked at the far end. "Almost there," he encouraged Lily, whose small legs were tiring. They were halfway across the bridge when headlights flooded the entrance behind them. Sheriff Garner's SUV blocked their exit. "Keep going," Mark urged, pushing Lily toward Abigail's waiting figure at the far end. Before they could reach her, more headlights appeared, council members' vehicles blocking the northern exit. They were trapped in the covered bridge, caught between the council and whatever horror now hunted through Ashvale's woods. The covered bridge became an island of shadows between the harsh vehicle headlights at either end. Mark pulled Lily behind one of the bridge's central support beams as footsteps approached from both directions. "Mark Holloway," Sheriff Garner's voice echoed in the enclosed space. "You have something that belongs to us." "A child isn't property," Mark called back, his phone recording in his pocket. "You can't feed her to your monster." Reverend Caldwell's voice came from the opposite end. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. The pact has protected this town for 2 centuries. "I understand perfectly," Mark replied. "I've seen your ledger. I've been in the chamber beneath the chapel. I know what happened to Tommy and all the others." Abigail's voice cut through the tension. "It's over, William. Mark has evidence. He's been recording everything." "Then we'll take the phone too," Sheriff Garner said coldly. "Step out now, and perhaps we can be merciful." Mark whispered to Lily, "When I create a distraction, run to Abigail. Don't stop for anything." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear and determination. Mark fumbled in his pocket and found his lighter. Looking up at the wooden beams crisscrossing the bridge ceiling, he made a desperate decision. "Last chance, Holloway," called the sheriff, his footsteps drawing closer. Mark flicked the lighter and held it to the aged timber above. The dry wood, preserved with creosote decades ago, caught immediately. Flames licked upward, casting wild shadows throughout the bridge. "Fire!" someone shouted. Mark pushed Lily toward Abigail. "Run now!" As council members scattered in confusion, Mark darted the opposite way, drawing attention from the fleeing child. Sheriff Garner lunged for him, catching his jacket. "You fool!" Garner snarled. Do you know what you've done? The fire spread rapidly along the wooden ceiling. Through the growing smoke, Mark saw Abigail grab Lily and pull her toward safety. Wrenched free from Garner's grip, I've ended your sacrifices. You've doomed us all, Reverend Caldwell shouted from the other end of the bridge. Without the offering, the congregant will take its payment in full. The ground beneath them shuddered. From the direction of the chapel came an unearthly wailing, the same hungry cry Mark had heard in the woods, but louder now, closer. It's coming, one of the council members cried. Panic in her voice. Mark fought through the thickening smoke toward the exit where Abigail waited. Behind him, timbers began to crack as the fire consumed the bridge's structure. Sheriff Garner grabbed for Mark again, but a burning beam crashed between them. The sheriff stumbled backward, disappearing into the smoke. Outside the bridge, Mark gasped for clean air, finding Abigail and Lily waiting in the car. Drive! He shouted, jumping into the passenger seat. As Abigail accelerated away, Mark looked back to see council members fleeing the burning bridge. Not all made it out shadowy. Figures were still visible inside as sections of the roof began to collapse. We need to get out of Ashvale, Mark said, checking that his phone was still recording. Head for the state police barracks in Hampton. What about the people in town? Abigail asked. If what they said is true, I don't know, Mark admitted. But we can't save everyone. We need to get this evidence to authorities who can help. They sped along the river road, the burning bridge receding in the rearview mirror. Lily sat silently in the back seat, her white gown ghostly in the darkness. As they rounded a bend, Mark saw lights ahead, cars blocking the road. Not police vehicles, but ordinary townsfolk. They formed a blockade, Abigail said, slowing the car. Turn around, Mark urged. Before she could, vehicles appeared behind them as well. They were surrounded. What do we do? Abigail whispered. Mark thought quickly. The old logging road. Can we reach it from here? Abigail nodded, turning the car sharply onto a dirt track that paralleled the river. The vehicle bounced over the rough terrain, branches scraping against the windows. Behind them, headlights followed. Some of the townspeople had discovered their escape route. They're gaining on us, Mark said, checking the side mirror. The car lurched suddenly as something large darted across the road ahead, a deer, perhaps, or something else. Abigail swerved to avoid it, sending them skidding toward the riverbank. Hold on, she shouted, fighting the steering wheel. The car slid to a stop mere feet from the water's edge. The pursuing vehicles were closing in, their headlights illuminating the trees around them. We'll have to continue on foot, Mark said, helping Lily from the back seat. The woods will give us cover. They abandoned the car and plunged into the forest, moving away from the river. Behind them, voices called out as searchers spread through the trees. The old Winthrop cabin is about half a mile east, Abigail whispered. We might find shelter there. They moved as quickly as they could through the underbrush, Lily between them. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, providing just enough light to navigate. A distant scream echoed through the forest, then another closer. Not the sound of pursuit, but of terror. What's happening? Lily asked, trembling. I don't know, Mark admitted. They crested a small rise, gaining a view of Ashvale in the valley below. The chapel stood on its hill, but something was wrong. Where the white steeple should have risen against the night sky, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. As they watched, tendrils of that darkness extended outward, reaching toward the town like grasping fingers. The congregant, Abigail whispered. It's free. We need to keep moving, Mark said, turning away from the terrible sight. They reached the Winthrop cabin as a cold wind began to howl through the trees. The abandoned structure offered little comfort, its roof partially collapsed, windows long since shattered, but its stone walls still stood. Inside, Mark used his lighter to find an old lantern, which he lit with shaking hands. The weak light revealed a single room with a rusted iron stove and broken furniture. "We'll rest here until dawn," he decided. "Then make for the county line." Abigail helped Lily settle on a relatively clean corner of the floor, wrapping her in a musty blanket they found in a trunk. "Will they find us?" the girl asked. "Not here," Abigail assured her, though her eyes met Mark's with uncertainty. Mark checked his phone, no signal, but the recording was intact. Hours of evidence documenting the council's conspiracy and their ritual chamber. He also had photos of the ledger with its list of names, decades of children sacrificed to feed the entity they called the Congregate. "What happens now?" Abigail asked quietly once Lily had fallen into an exhausted sleep. "If the pact is broken, I don't know," Mark admitted. "But we couldn't let them take another child." The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the cabin's remaining shutters. Strange sounds carried on the air, not quite human, not quite animal. From their vantage point, they could see distant flashes of light in Ashvale, as if electrical transformers were exploding. Mark thought of Tommy, of the thing wearing his face in the chamber beneath the chapel. Had that really been part of his brother, preserved somehow in that hungry entity? Or merely a cruel mimicry designed to lure more victims? As dawn approached, the sounds from town gradually faded. The first gray light revealed a changed landscape, trees bent at unnatural angles, the ground scarred as if by massive claws. "I think it's over," Mark said, peering through a broken window. They emerged cautiously from the cabin. The morning air felt strangely still after the night's chaos. Smoke rose from several locations in Ashvale, but there were no sirens, no signs of emergency response. "We should go," Abigail said. "While we can." They followed a logging trail that would eventually connect with the state highway beyond Ashvale's borders. Lily walked between them, her white gown now dirty and torn, but her steps determined as they crested the final hill before leaving Ashvale's township. Mark turned for one last look at the village where he'd grown up. The chapel was gone, not burned or collapsed, but simply absent, as if it had never existed. Where it had stood was only bare earth. Throughout the town, several buildings showed similar voids, homes and businesses that had stood for generations, now erased. The rest of Ashvale appeared intact, though eerily silent. "It took them," Abigail whispered, "the founding families. Their homes, the bloodlines that made the original pact," Mark realized. "What will happen to the town now?" Lily asked. Mark knelt beside her. "I don't know. But whatever happens, the children of Ashvale won't have to fear the third bell anymore." As they turned away from Ashvale for the last time, Mark's phone chimed with a text message signal finally restored beyond the town's borders. It was from an unknown number, but the message chilled him. "Thank you for freeing me, brother. The pact confined me to one child each year. Now I can choose my own offerings. See you soon." Mark deleted the message without showing the others. Some truths were too terrible to share. As they walked toward the distant highway and whatever future awaited, the morning sun rose fully above the mountains. Behind them, the chapel bell, somehow surviving though its building did not, tolled once in the empty air. Mark didn't look back again.